obvious what. Because it is a startup, so there is still some ambiguity, but there still is like this culture of, you meet up every day, you do a certain type of, like debriefing of what you're supposed to do for the day and kind of strictly stick with some of that stuff. There's also an element of, I think in general, what I've observed in academia is there's like so much ambiguity, and often it's up to you on your own to kind of sift through that ambiguity daily on your own. Whereas often there is kind of a goal in more industry context where you're working towards a certain type of product, or you're working towards a certain type of demo or something like that, and you need to have a thing done by that demo. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, perfect in all ways, but it often for a startup, you have like a minimum viable product. So but you're working towards something that you're gonna show. Whereas academia, sometimes it's a very long time. You can give a poster about work in progress. So kind of different atmosphere in that way.
With the context of getting out of undergrad, I think I wish I had known that it's okay to ask questions and you don't have to be the smartest one in the room.
Great, thank you. Other questions from online people? Or in person? Yeah. This is the session.
So it seems like in order to get experience and everything before getting a job, you need an internship. But the best way to get an internship is usually if you know someone, but like personally I don't. So do you have any advice? Yeah.
Network. I know people hate that word, and I know people basically, it's basically like if you know someone, you know someone. But don't underestimate the power of events like this. Like some of the internships that all my friends and all my colleagues have gone, have been through summer camps, workshop series, going up to a person after a brown bag or any sort of visiting scholar, giving a talk or lecture. You never know when these kind of situations will crop up. That's not just for internships too, it's also for like jobs. You don't actually know if something's being posted or thinking about being posted until you talk to them. Usually that work in progress is happening in the mind, and if you ask very gently, then you might be the first person to hear about it if you were to speak with someone. As someone who gets very anxious talking to new people, it definitely helps just even gently prodding or letting other people know, and then having friends being like, oh, I know Kelly's looking for a job right now, and they'll promote you too. So that was also a strategy, was getting my friends to promote me for me.
I definitely agree. I mean, I had about 4 months of period of unemployment between my jobs where like it was my only thing to do. Like I was applying for jobs, and I networked and I did a lot of, reaching out to people on LinkedIn. This job did not come out of any of my networks, just to be clear about that. It was fit about my background and what they were looking at that point. Like it's very much a good fit at a given situation. But I now see that a lot of people they identify what they want to do and seek out those people on LinkedIn. Like, hey, I want to do this. How do I do it? And then those conversations, even if it's not important in the beginning and if it's not fruitful, like they're not going to offer you a job right away. But through the word of mouth and through just like letting people know, it's definitely the most important step. And I also didn't have an internship before getting my first job. It was through like a postdoc from our lab who said, oh, this could be a good fit for you. I know you're looking for a job. So yeah, networking is important.
Yeah, I guess I'll just underscore that a ton more by saying that typically in the past, the advice has always been to network. But in these days where both academic and industry positions, especially in tech, are a little bit extra hard to get, networking becomes that much more important. And then if people around you are not, if there isn't so much of a culture of internship, I might look at some like your friends in engineering. They tend to do a little bit more internships in engineering during PhD, so maybe talk to some of them too.
The only bit that's left to be said is getting an internship is can get very political as well. So if you don't get it, it's nothing personal against your specific skill set. It's a matter of what they are looking for at that time.
Another thing I have noticed is that I would reach out to, hiring managers or people who are actually doing the work that I want to do. But I noticed that reaching out to the recruiters directly has been very helpful because they are the ones who are keeping giving the first eye on your CV and letting them know that you're interested in this role is, might be a little bit more effective as well.
And I'll just add that last year we had almost the exact same question and one of our panelists who said, oh yeah, be shameless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
All right, other questions?
This is very, very general, but it's just in the terms of the term industry. So you're looking for a job, right? And like, for example, I have a clear idea that industry involves, for example, pharmaceutical companies. And there is a tech companies. But what else is there? Because you go to LinkedIn and then it's like, okay, what is the job position that I'm looking for? What is there? What are the key terms or the keywords that I should be looking for? Because it's so broad that I actually have no idea.
That is an excellent, excellent question. I will also repeat something that someone else has told me, by the way, small tangent. Apparently, people are filtering CVs through keywords, so you also need to be a little bit smart about that. So some companies won't even look at your CV if you don't have some certain keywords and phrases in your CV. Found out recently, was very, very shocked. But in terms of industry, and I will speak broadly as well about what my friends, as well as colleagues and people I've spoken with, what kind of jobs outside of academics they've gotten. One of the big ones was consulting. Consulting in a lot of different ways. So one of the recent graduates from our program went off into like legal consultation. Some about, let's prepare for a case, someone may have done a like DUI. Were they in the right state of mind, cognitively speaking? So like from a cognitive psychology perspective, to make that mental assessment, or are they in with their full wherewithal to like be on the stand and like, say that they were guilty or not guilty, stuff like that. Nonprofit work has been surprisingly popular. People want to know a lot about other people. So in that kind of respect, being project managers, broadly speaking, has also been a pretty popular job title that I think a lot of people are looking for. So like, you know how to manage your own research project, but scale that one up, you can manage people to do your research project for you. Like that, those kind of administrative skills outside of academics has also been pretty transferable. Trying to think about any other things.
Academic adjacent jobs, like.
Academic adjacent jobs as well.
Like NIH jobs or.
NIH
government?
jobs.
Yeah.
Also slightly political, so take that with a grain of salt, however you
Yeah.
wanna see the hiring freezes these days, but I've seen government data science positions as well. Speaking to the internship, there's also been government data science positions for other things like transit, security, remissions, other things like that, so there's a lot of. Basically, industry is a catch-all for anything that's not related to a university. Sorry, it can be literally anything.
Yeah, if you're interested in following your, whatever, if you're in a master's or PhD program and you wanna keep continuing to do the research, that's, that somewhat limits, but if you're gonna be a data scientist or data analyst, like logistics companies need data scientists as well, or, like any company that they don't have to be it doesn't have to be a tech company. That's another thing that doesn't talked about as much. And I had one more thought, but it's leaving, but.
Education, sorry,
Yeah.
and also to like people go out to teach with our TA-ships, if you do that, or make research programs or educational programs, that's been pretty popular amongst my friends.
There are really cool research jobs and like NGOs and research institutes as well. I had another thought, but I'll just like pass it on and remember it because I completely forgot.
Yes, I
Yeah.
hope you remember. I think in addition to everything that you guys have already said, it can help to look at where people have gone, both from your program, your PhD level program, and from your undergrad, like departments. And see what sort of career paths they've had that can kind of open up doors for you to think about, would I enjoy something like that? And you can always reach out to them if you're curious about it, that, oh, I'm also a graduate from XYZ University. I'd love to talk more about how you like this position. People are usually like really happy to talk, especially if you make a personal connection like that.
I think that anything that's left is maybe
Yeah.
accelerator programs. Seattle Tech event is going on right now, getting there, talking about yourself. Would really help.
I remembered what I was gonna
Yeah.
say. Sorry. So I didn't know much about clinical research till I started looking into it. Like you mentioned pharmaceutical, but it's also that there's also the medical device side of it as well. So for instance, what we're doing at WOOP is there are certain features that need to be regulated by the FDA and EU. And although it's a tech company, what we do is kind of different than what the rest of the tech company is doing. We're trying to ensure that we have enough evidence to meet the safety and efficacy of that is required by the regulatory bodies. And the clinical research, I think neuroscience, psychology, clinical research is also an interesting path that I was not aware of.
I'm just gonna add that, I would encourage you all not to underestimate how transferable your skills as data scientists are. Even if you don't feel like you are primarily a data scientist, all the working with data you've done is actually very transferable in other areas. Next question.
I have a question, maybe kind of going off of that. I don't know if people can hear me.
Speak.
Okay. So yeah, sort of going off of that, I don't have a very formal background in things like coding or data science, but it is something I'm very interested in. I don't know what the speakers' backgrounds are, but I was wondering if you could talk about either for you or for people you know who don't have that formal experience. Do you think like PhD work has proven to be enough? Do you think, people who are hiring look for something else?
I was on this side this time.
So if you go for a very hardcore deep tech engineering role in the industry, they will require you to do a lot of lead code exercises. Having said that, after you're done with the first few rounds of coding exercises, then I'm sure your research experience would be extremely valuable because you'll have much deeper stories about how you have resolved your own challenges. But on the contrary, if you're going for the role, for my current role, they were more interested in just the kind of problems that I've solved in my PhD and how I look at different scientific fields and what kind of impact I could be making. So I guess it's kind of all over the place depending on where you want to apply.
Yeah, I agree. It can be really all over the place in terms of what level of technical background they're looking for. I'll say my undergraduate degree is in chemical and biological engineering. My PhD is in like an interdepartmental neuroscience thing. So I've seen in the neuroscience program, I've seen like neuroscientists and psychologists go into kind of data science roles and sort of technical consulting a bit, maybe more kind of generalist consulting and a bit of sort of data science consulting kind of stuff. And I'd encourage you to think about the skills that you have here. You might be competing with, a computer scientist who may be better equipped to do some software development, but they may not have ever really run a regression. They might have focused very much on software development and not on, data analysis. So there's a lot of things like that you might have a lot deeper experience. You might have more like formal kind of statistical and data science training, the sort of training you have with dealing with large dimensional neuroimaging data sets, for example, or like complex kind of time series data. Not everybody who's technically in like a technical program will have exactly that sort of training. For sure, some of them will, but having sort of the PhD experience, you've done both sort of some of the data science stuff and thought deeply about how to formulate questions and how to make inferences about things. And that's very, very valuable.
Yeah, I'd like to echo both of the sentiments that interviewing for a data science role is quite different than, I don't know, a research science role or UX researcher role if you're interested in that. And in certain roles, there's some barriers for, like going through the leak code and understanding how it works technically. But as it was said that what you do as a data scientist varies a lot as well. I was part of the Women in Data Science group in Seattle area. And we've got to listen to a lot of different people from the different backgrounds, and like in certain like government jobs, for instance, they don't do anything more the complex than a linear regression, because that's what they need at the moment. And then certain jobs would require you to do a more complex machine learning model, maybe, but it's a skill to actually interview and go through that. My background is in psychology, undergrad and grad. I've used coding for research purposes. And when I was looking for different opportunities, I realized that I need to work a little bit more to like, fit that data science profile. But that changes. And also with the, usage of LLMs, things have shifted quite a bit, to like, from the hirer's perspective, to like, you receive a lot of, take home assignments that were done through ChatGPT as well.
I was just gonna say that I think there is some level of, if you want a data science job, you do have to reach a bare minimum of whatever. Like as mentioned before, it varies wildly, but there is some super basic, like minimum level of competency that's sort of expected, especially in the era of ChatGPT. Like if you can't code, they would then expect you to be able to throw the question at ChatGPT or whichever to at least produce whatever kind of answer that would come out. Like there seems to be an elevated level just to some degree. But I also emphasize that we're also not talking about one very critical skill, which is technical writing. I think that actually at the end of the day, you might do a lot of coding, but you also do a lot of writing or a lot of documenting. And that's also a skill that is heavily relied upon. I think once you get out into the real world, you write a lot of reports and you write a lot of like summaries of what you did in the week and stuff like that. And how you can communicate that well, effectively and clearly every single time you're asked to do a progress report. It's pretty actually important.
I'd love to add just one more thing to that. I think the writing element and also the ability to communicate, that's something you're trained really well during the PhD, or different levels also of academic training, that not everybody gets. That's a really, really unique thing. And a lot of companies are looking for people who can think holistically about a problem and communicate really well.
One contrasting skill, I think, would have been great to have known of earlier would have been how to think about scale. If you're interested in applying in deep tech firms, within my research projects, the scale was probably a couple of users or hundreds of people. But as you try to scale your small research project, it can get really complicated. So definitely thinking about how to scale your research artifact to thousands, even millions of people could be a useful thing to think about.
Great. Next question.
How does the mentorship structure in industry roles like differ from the academic type university setting that PhD students like are familiar with?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
I'm sure it varies from company to company. My company is a 10-year-old startup. We are about 600 folks, and the structure is very collaborative. And I really liked during my PhD, I liked the rapport that I had with my advisors, that I was able to just speak my mind, receive feedback, that back and forth, and I was able to find that in my industry jobs as well. But I'm sure it varies from company to company. So like for bigger companies, there might be more of a hierarchical structure. But so far, I have been able to receive the mentorship I needed, and also be able to contribute to what the decision making as well. So, okay.
I could just add another analogy here. I think for me, it was sort of, it felt like leaving a bird's nest. So it is a different relationship, and then you work on the new relationship with your new mentor or advisor, but it's certainly different, and you should you can be encouraged around it, but it's different than just you entering your advisor's room and asking a random question.
And I saw a question back here.
So running up to their interviews, did you like have a portfolio? How did you prep up? Like, what did you put in your portfolio? Describe that process.
When I was job searching, I also wasn't sure exactly what kind of path I wanted to take. A lot of folks who come out of our PhD program go into user experience research or research scientist, data scientist. And I kind of prepared different things for like, and I realized that for UX research, for instance, the portfolio is really important. But I think for a more data focused job, they would look at your GitHub and what kind of projects you have. And whether you have that acumen. I think one interesting thing that I thought it helped me is that as part of our neuroscience and psychology programs, we get these, good clinical practice, human factors research certifications on City, right? And I didn't think about it, but I just put it on my LinkedIn, but there might have been a case that that information was useful because now I'm in clinical research. So like basically putting information that reflects what you want to do, whether it's data versus UX or versus research on LinkedIn is definitely useful for the recruiters. And I know that a lot of people benefit from having a website as well. So it depends on what kind of job you would like to get, but GitHub for data roles is important.
Yeah, and I'll say not from personal experience applying, but I'm working with my PhD student right now on exploring industry possibilities, which by the way, given, the historically low number of tenure track faculty positions, I think is a very realistic thing that all of us PIs should be thinking about with our students. And in engineering, it's a little bit more of a typical thing to think about. But what I'm working through, but still, we're not trained well to help transition people in that way. So what we've been working on, and she's been doing an amazing job taking the lead in this, is she reaches out and talks to a lot of different people. And I think a lot of the questions here, like how to prepare the CV and how to voice myself and like how to speak the language and stuff like that, those questions that we hear a lot are answered by talking specifically to different people who are in the industry that you might be interested in. And the answers can vary depending on the industry too. So I would say like some of the things that I think have been most helpful for her has been her going out of her way to reach out to people, especially people who may have had some hiring experience. Because they can tell you like, these are the sort of resumes that we see. This is the sort of thing from your package that may or may not be helpful. And then again, if you have if you're like a personal connection, the reason why they should talk to you, they'll be more inclined to be like, oh yeah, I also recently made that transition from your field to this field and from your university. So I would love to talk to you. Like I just went through it. I know what you're going through.
Yeah, I think portfolio, a website, two GitHub repositories which have proper markdown, proper open source licensing. If you may, your code should be documented. Don't underestimate that people people will look you up if they're interested in hiring you. For your projects, definitely follow an inwards versus outwards perspective. People don't understand your project from just reading your abstract. So follow like an outward perspective that how one might read your project who have no idea about what your field of research is about.
I'll just second the fact that I'm not industry, but I've never encountered a GitHub page that had code so bad it was worse than a GitHub page with no code. So by all means, put your code on GitHub. We want to see it when we're hiring. Okay, next question. Yeah.
Are there any options of staying in the academia without becoming a PI?
It's mine.
I'm an academia and I'm not a PI. Well, yeah, I'm not a professor. So there are definitely some options, but I'll let the panel speak.
I'm in academia and I'm not a PI, but I do write grants and I put my my manager as a PI. So there are definitely roles, research engineering roles, research associate role, research scientist roles, where you may or may not want, may or may not write grants if you're not interested.
As someone who had that thought very intimately, yes, I am in a research scientist position, and when I was given the choice, actually, Ariel, when we were having that conversation, he literally asked me, he's like, do you want to be put as a postdoc? With the implication that you want to become a tenure track faculty, at least that's how I interpreted it, or a research scientist, and I sort of sat down and chewed about it, and I was like, no, research scientist for me. For a variety of reasons, but there's positions like this where, especially as neuroimaging data sets get larger and larger, and managing that entire database or multiple databases becomes more difficult. There starts to become a space for people with these kinds of technical skills and project management skills that, you know, a graduate student's probably trying to focus on, right, getting their project started, maybe collecting some data and running that sort of smaller sample study. And, or a postdoc who's trying to get a PI job after 2 years of also intensely doing maybe a bigger size project. What about the space in the middle where the lab still has to continue and still produce work of high level quality, or for maybe share data sets with other people around the world, especially the way we're going more and more towards open source things. There's space for people like who have that kind of ability and skills to maintain a lab and keep it going, just from that perspective. There's also sort of what I would say it's sort of like an open secret is that for me, I'm actually not 100% all the time off of one like research scientist grant, let's say, like off an R01. I actually have about 15% of my FTE, so full-time physician employment percentage, is actually through the Center for Human Neuroscience. I basically run as an MRI operator. So let's say 85% of my funding comes from being a research scientist, and then couple that together with 15% from doing other jobs, like I said, like an MRI operator. That combines into 100%. You still get your benefits, you still get to stay around university and do things that you love. There's also opportunities for me to do collaborations or consulting work with people down at the medical school to get another, let's say, 10% FTE. There's ways to cobble it together. And I'm not saying it's easy. You sort of make your own job in that case, but that's something that I felt like my skills were very well suited for. And so I went towards that route to stay around an academic setting, so I could do the research that I love to do.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize exactly that there's a bit of a continuum in terms of funding situations for some of these roles. So in some cases, you could be 100% funded off of a PI's grant and maybe hired by that PI. And if that PI loses that grant, maybe that's their only grant. But in other cases, you could be hired by, let's say, multiple PIs or off of multiple grants, or maybe there's even institutional funds for a position like that. So those are just kind of different, quite different funding situations that it's important to be aware of and just, you know, ask around what that funding situation looks like and what that, you know, it also has implications for longer term longevity in that role. So just very important to think about. And then I also wanted to add that there is also the other type of academic position, which is, first there are like non-tenure track research roles, which overlaps with some of the ones we're talking about. And then there's teaching roles as well. And that's also a really fulfilling career path. I will say sometimes it's really good to be really to inquire a lot about some of the teaching roles. Sometimes people who have teaching specific faculty positions can get really overloaded with teaching responsibilities. So it's really good to make sure that you're with research or with purely teaching or purely research role. It's always good to ask around and to make sure that that position is well supported and is going to be a place where you'll thrive and be happy and healthy.
I could add my 2 cents towards the funding bit. So the good side about it is that you know that you're not getting laid off for the next N number of months or years. But the downside of that is that you know that you have to, after a year, think about, okay, how do we get more funding? So it's very transparent, depending on the role.
Continuing with the same question, I was wondering, what's your suggestion for looking for this kind of jobs inside academia, but without like pursuing a PI position? And especially for maybe people that are from the US, or where in countries where the system is very different.
Yeah, and I'll say that we are, the NeuroHackademy funded by the National Institute of Health here is a little US centric, so Apologies that we don't have a diverse set of perspectives from other countries, but.
That's a really good point. The question is how to go about finding some of these positions. Okay, yes. So often for these specific roles, like instructor or research science and stuff like that, you will often see them advertised. Either, you know, if you're a neuroimager, you'll often see that on something like OHBM, career boards. Social media is a really great place to see them. I personally, a lot of communities move towards blue sky, so I do still think though that Twitter is probably the place that shares more of this information, but I would check both. There could be some posts on LinkedIn if there are certain departments or faculty that you're interested in. Often they'll have a hiring post on their website as well. So I would check all those places, conference places, social media, and faculty websites or university department websites.
Yeah, for instance, University of Washington has a webpage that specifically, you know, you can choose academic, non-academic jobs, and that there are a lot of titles that still conduct research, but they're not tenure track academic positions.
Sorry, I'm really trying to chew really slowly on how this will happen. Is that I think the foot in the door will probably come from a very typical place, like job postings, networking, maybe information off of social media. But then the way my situation sort of came about was actually through conversations after I was hired. It was like, oh, okay, grant's ending in about 6 months. How can we elongate this money, make it pad out in a way that we can draw this out? Well, how about I talk to some other professor who I know is getting a grant coming in? Maybe that'll be my 25%. Or like, right, it's sort of a little bit of negotiation once you get maybe through the standard way. Or maybe if we take that even further is like having that conversation with multiple people. That's up to you if you want to handle that. But the way that I've sort of found it to work is I'm already in my position or in some sort of way, and then we start negotiating. Or you start looking for places where it's like, it's also sort of commonly known that medical schools don't have tenure track professors. So how are all these medical people being funded? Well, they're all writing grants, they're all research scientists technically, and they're cobbling together a bunch of multi-site, multi-PI kind of grants. They're looking for people who want to be able to do many different kind of things with a lot of different kind of skills. And I think like our applied physics place is all just non-tenure tracked professor level, but not officially titled, like principal investigators of some sort, but they're not tenure tracked. They're all research scientists, technically speaking, and they're working together to cobble together some sort of institute that they can do it. Places do this a lot, more than often than you think, once you step outside of psychology and neuroimaging.
Great, next question. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here. My question is also about mentorship. So, for example, like during your PhD, to the extent that you guys would like to share, like who are kind of the specific opportunities or people that you guys talk to decide whether like one, you want to go to industry, or two, you want to stay in academia as going to tenure track, or three, you want to be a research scientist. And like once you're sort of leaning towards one decision, who are the people who you talk to like achieve your goal? And then I think also like specifically for Stephanie, like who are the people you should talk to if you want to become a professor? Like I feel like there's hardly a book about like how to become like a psychology professor or a neuroscience professor.
Yes. All right, so I have advice for everyone who's interested in faculty, tenure track faculty positions. So join a Slack called Future PI Slack. I give this recommendation at every single career development talk that I give to where anyone might be interested in faculty positions. It's a really great community of people across the world. It's very, you know, Western centric, but there are representatives across the world that share advice and materials and all kinds of stuff as regards putting your application together and preparing yourself to apply for tenure track roles. So that's one thing. Regarding mentorship, your PI should be the best person to give you mentorship, but if your PI, for whatever reason, doesn't seem like that person for you, it's really fantastic to seek out additional mentorship of other faculty members. And especially people who have sort of the jobs that you would be really excited about. So they can tell you what they did and what sort of conferences they went to and like how many talks, it varies widely field to field. What sort of papers, what sort of impact factors, what sort of level of conference papers versus, like more traditional journal outlets that is expected. And that's also what the Future KI Slack is great for, because people will say, you'll see like anonymously, they'll report the metrics, like how many papers people had versus how many, how many job offers they got. It doesn't always have to correlate, I'll say that much. It's not as super dependent as you might think, but it is helpful to just get a sense of like, what people's general backgrounds anonymously looked like. They also tell you tips about negotiating, like how much people are asking for, which is so important. You usually don't get that information, but anyways, I would definitely recommend going to some faculty that seem interested in mentoring and having kind of the roles that you're interested in. Usually if you approach a faculty member and you're like, oh, you have exactly the position I want, or a softer version of that, I'd love to hear what you did, can we just chat? People are usually pretty happy to chat.
Yeah, I wanna echo that, like, when you reach out to someone, hey, I wanna learn what you're doing and I need help in this, they tend to help. Sometimes when I reached out to folks, they did not reply on LinkedIn, for instance, but out of everyone, some people help, and generally they are trying to, get you to where you are going as well. In terms of mentorship, I know that certain labs, people talk about, oh, some professors will push for academia, although there are very little jobs out there.
Yeah.
But I was lucky to have advisors who were aware of the reality and who I could talk to about, okay, this is the type of career I want, and they supported me. One thing I want to caveat is that, my advisors would help me in any way possible in terms of getting, in terms of their network, but their network could be academic as well. So if you're going into industry, they can point you to the alumni. And yeah, I would definitely reach out to alumni as well who are doing the same things that you want to do. Postdocs.
Oh, I was going to say that next.
Postdocs.
But we already mentioned professors and you know your relationship with your PI the best. I actually relied heavily upon my senior members in my lab who were like a little older than me or maybe a few years advanced than me. Either they graduated before me or they decided, master out and do other things, or postdocs who wanted to do the academic track or make that transition to industry. We had a pretty large lab when we were still here and before we all dispersed into the wind. So I got a good look at where everybody else went. Like we had a collection of people who went to PI ships, like traditional ones, and then industry, and then more industry from the graduate level rather than for postdoc. So I relied really heavily on my village, basically. In our lab, we also constantly say it takes a village to raise you to where you want to be. And it's very, very true. I heard from my friends that if like a postdoc went off to industry, they'll tell me about what it's like for them, what their daily lives is like. And that sort of helped me decide. I was like, it's not for me. I don't want to be beholden to deadlines. That doesn't interest me. The research questions, like I have to change based on someone else's whims, not for me. Like, those kind of stories you hear and they trickle in, you make your own little decision about like, oh, does that suit me or not? And of course, it's not 100% certain, right? You're not experiencing it yourself in that way. But for me, it was enough to get a good gauge on wanting to stay in academics or at least academic adjacent.
Nothing new to add here.
I'll just underscore some of what was said, that just in the last 6 months, I've met with 4 or 5 students who basically called me to talk about job advice. So it's not only not unusual, it's actually pretty common to do that.
I've heard and also just encountered a couple instances where both companies and institutions have requirements where they need to post online certain job availabilities, even if they already, have someone locally that they're gonna hire. And I guess I was just curious if that's a practice for all of your workplaces. And if so, like how prevalent is that? I know one of you or has come up recommending looking at job postings on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and like if that's happening a lot, like are those still sort of good places to find and apply for jobs?
Won't you go to the secret?
The secret is that it happens for academic jobs too. So take that with a grain of salt, whether it's industry or not. If they want to do an internal hire, you'll never know until you maybe sometimes come up for job interviews and then you hear through the grapevines of some other PI. I'm relating a story here. You hear through the grapevines that they already had an internal hire, even though they did the job talks already. So it's not just industry. Academics do it too. So I cannot say unless you ask. And they might not even tell you until it's over.
Again, my experience have been with startups and startups only. I don't know how it is for the big tech companies. I've been in some hiring committees as well. So far, we've only been hiring the people that we actually need at the given time, because again, it's a growing startup. So that's why I didn't see any fake job postings, but it could be true for a larger scale company.
No, that's about right. Yeah.
My answer is yes to both. They might be dangling job postings, but you should apply
Yeah.
Yeah, because you won't know.
because you won't.
Also get your foot in the door. And in fact, I'd say that may be most common at public universities where they're required by state law to post things publicly. More questions? Yeah.
So my understanding is that it's becoming more and more common to finish your degree and not have a job yet. But you kind of lose your resources and you're sad and don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any advice for those who need to find something but want to stay productive and happy.
How to advice for people who want to, I guess, stay afloat, but want to stay happy and like supported.
Finding something or like doing something between jobs, basically.
Yeah. This is anecdotally, but you will also see a bit in the news about this, about how difficult it is to have tech jobs. How there have been many freezes and layoffs at companies. Anecdotally, we're also seeing like not a ton of new tech jobs in certain areas specifically. So in Boston, for example, but there are many places outside of some of these major cities that are certainly hiring. So one thing is I feel like to reinforce what you're saying, it is kind of an especially difficult time to make a career transition, both in academia and in industry. That is just very much a reality. It's nice to, if you can be especially flexible about what sorts of things you might be considering, both geographically and what type of industry you're interested in. And at this point, I think there are a number of people who are choosing to stay in training positions. Usually, many of us would encourage people to move out of training positions. You're not getting paid enough. You definitely are doing really great work and you're ready to be more independent. But the truth is there's a little bit more security in staying in some of these positions. So I'm seeing a little bit more of that. So those are kind of my thoughts, flexibility, and maybe you might want to sit for a bit in this weird time.
Relaying also anecdotally of one of our former postdocs who basically was jobless or was job hunting for about a year. Look into your government resources. They went on to unemployment, basically for about half the time they were looking for a job. It wasn't their full pay. I believe it was about 80% of their pay at the time of leaving their job. And it was able to float them through or budget out that entire year-long job search. So don't be afraid to look in for some government help. Like all they had to do was prove every single week that they were searching for a job. And they were like, okay, here's the money to keep doing that. So look into your resources that you have available through wherever. Communities that you might have more in touch with. You may have to pull from family, if that's the case. I've heard of those kind of stories as well. Or you can also, there was also sort of the running joke was like, okay, it's time to work at a bookstore just to make it work. But I think that's been a lot of people's experiences recently. So good luck.
I just want to add that I'm an international student. International students cannot work outside of their areas. It is tough, and we also have this STEM OPT situation where you have to find a job. So like planning ahead, I had a job right after graduation, but that ended and like I was looking for a job before, but the scene is quite bad. So I acknowledge that some folks out there will not be able to work. For that, just planning ahead and knowing the saving is what I did, honestly, because it's quite uncertain when you're gonna find a job. And for instance, like I had to move geographically. I was in Seattle and I moved to Boston because it was a good opportunity, but at the same time, I had a ticking clock as well,
Sorry, and I know I already spoke, but just to build off of that point, the flip side is also true in the sense of, at least in academia, there are a lot of countries outside of the US that are seeing the struggles that we're facing now. And there are a lot, we see various companies trying to scoop up American scientists and we're seeing like rising numbers of different types of jobs that people can apply to. So if your flexibility can include such a thing, it can be a fantastic opportunity.
For international students, I recommend doing the ABD route, all about dissertation, and continue doing TA and RA while you find a job.
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions, so, no, I think the pizza's almost here. Have a break.
This is slightly it's on a slightly less practical note, but do you have like thoughts about balancing like idealism with like reality factors? So like I think something like balancing your why with also your like how, in the sense of like I know there's the 80,000 hours framework, which is a little bit controversial nowadays, but like thinking about really trying to make an impact in a space that is really dominated by financial like incentives and big corporate players, and it's easy to get lost in like being worried about your title or your salary, but that's probably not why most of us got into what we're doing. And like how do you kind of stay true to that, or do you just interested in your experiences with that problem?
Easy one.
I think seeing second order effects of your actions is a very hard challenge. What you can do is just have that perspective as to how much you can let go and how much you won't. With my current pay at where I'm working right now, it's definitely not what a big deep tech corporation would have paid me after a PhD in computer science, but it's what really works for me. And I have that balance where at least I personally feel that I'm having some positive impact in the world. But again, the second order effects of what I'm doing in my day-to-day life, it's very hard to evaluate it from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that it's helpful to have a very pragmatic plan that is really grounded in reality. And then you can always shoot for kind of the best possible outcome, but have a backup, have a timeline, if I don't have a certain type of position by this date, that's when I'll start planning for these other application cycles. Maybe I'm planning to apply for 2 years. Often the suggestion would be for the academic job market, plan to apply for 2 years. Maybe now that might be plan to apply for 3 years. Maybe you won't have, your dream job. But having a job, I think that you're happy with, you can always think that there's an opportunity to transition in the future. It's just your first job out of your PhD or postdoc or what have you. Nobody, especially not these days, expects you to stay there for the rest of your life.
I agree. My first job was directly related to my field, and I also got lucky in the second job that although it's a complete pivot in terms of the content of what I'm doing, I still get to do research and I still get to investigate and still contribute to science. But like during that period of job search, I have definitely looked into jobs that would not be the perfect fit, but still would make me like a better candidate for whatever next job I'm getting. So, it is not permanent. You can always switch it up, and if you know what you want to do, or if you don't want to, if you don't know what your words on, it's still gonna be okay. It's gonna be, you know, every job will probably have some impact on like how you want to, what you want to do next step.
Try to answer this question with a story. Hopefully it's not too long. Some of you also heard it on the center tour. So right before, I was originally going to graduate in 5 years in 2019, and we all know what happened in 2019 is that we got all shut down by COVID. And basically my original plan was to collect data, do the analysis, get out, no idea what was going to happen job wise. I thought I was going to become a postdoc tenure track kind of thing. And then COVID happened. Everything transitioned obviously online, and I started to do simulation work instead, just in an attempt to try to keep my dissertation going. Didn't happen. But what happened in that 2-year period was that then the Center for Human Neuroscience actually got built in that time frame. And when I emerged from it, I was able to collect actual human data and do my original slightly adjusted dissertation plan. And I graduated with a job at the center. And it's sort of like, how did I know that was going to happen in terms of like what I wanted or what my job would be coming out? I didn't. COVID actually sort of made me stay in Seattle. Otherwise, I would have gone somewhere else and done something else. And I find myself loving this job and wanting to continue this job. And it's more along the lines of like, how do I balance that versus the cynicism of actually having to do practical science? It's sort of an existential question. Like, I didn't know this would happen. I didn't know that this would exist. I sort of try to live in the moment that, oh wow, this opportunity sort of cropped up now. I get to do this. I get to do what I love when a lot of people don't get that chance to do it. Like it happens sort of by accident and by chance. So I try to live in the moment, especially now, because I had another existential crisis about February time, because we also know what happened in February around this year, where all of the NIH news. So it's trying not to worry too much about it and have faith in the fact that things will work out in the end. Maybe not the way you expected, but in some way.
And you know, people have non-negotiables, and depending on what part of like what stage of your part you're in, that will shape your decision, right? Like, you know, if people have families and they don't want to move somewhere else, and those will probably make you choose to sacrifice a little less from like the job satisfaction or your research practices. So that's something to consider. And again, things will change.
All right, so it is 4:30 and the pizza is here. So I think we're going to go ahead and end here. I know there were a couple more questions, but all of our panelists will be around for a bit and can chat with you. Now that said, the online folks obviously aren't going to be here for the pizza party, so I'd ask that all of us in the room maybe go get pizza first and let the online folks chat with the panel for a little bit if they want to, and then they'll be here and you can all chat with them and afterwards. This is sort of an everything nice. So.
Before we grab pizza, 2 comments. There are little individual salads there. Those are for folks that have dietary restrictions. I've been assured that the dressing is beginning by the way. There's also the group of you trust over here. Not eat those things unless you need to eat those food. The other thing, we're nice just said all kinds of things.
Do you have any questions?
I know.
Hello.
Oh, wait. The volume
We're
is.
turning up the volume. Can you guys hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. If anyone has questions, feel free, or just to chat.
Can you guys see us if we turn on cameras?
I think if your camera is off, we're not seeing it. Oh. We're gonna stop recording. Hello, Michelle.
Hi.
Well, I think it's automatic, that's fine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe it's just not turn on that. It's not doing anything.
Yeah, I don't know what you're seeing, but I can see you all. So hi. Nice.
We can see you.
I had one last question, but besides that, I don't really have other questions. I come from a psychology PhD program, and what I hear a lot of people that are interested in transitioning into industry roles saying is that like people in industry kind of don't know where to group like people who have gone through specifically psychology PhD programs because like, we're overqualified for a lot of things, but they don't quite understand how the skills that you do in a PhD program are transferable. So people in my network have had like issues communicating that to like potential employers. So I wonder if you guys have advice on that front.
I think it's very job specific. I've been saying at home because I did try to pursue different pathways. And definitely there is a language difference, like a jargon that in industry uses that are slightly different from academia, especially psychology PhD, right? And they just like, have different words for it, but talking to people who are actually in the industry and understanding like, what they're looking for and imagine that actually there are infographics about it. So in psychology, this means A/B testing, et cetera. So talking to people who have made this switch to whatever industry they're interested in and understand that they're moving also but once you are in, you realize a lot of what you are learning from a stats perspective, experimental design is quite transferable and almost, easier and simpler.
There's actually something really funny is that the transferable part I find from a lot of people telling the stories is actually just convincing the recruiter or the people on the who are reading your CVs at initial blush that you know how to do this, because a lot of times from what I've heard is that once you're on the actual interview, maybe past like the first initial stages, they're actually all people who have PhDs too, or they did your work. Like I had a friend basically get into eye tracking and they were like, oh, eye tracker, brand name, specs, whatever. And you would think that's something that only people who do this kind of research would do. Well, lo and behold, her manager was a PhD that came out of another psychology program. Like once you got past the initial transferring of language and jargon into what like someone outside of what we do day to day, it was actually pretty easy for her to convince the rest of the team that she knew exactly what she was doing. So there's like different levels of who you're interfacing with for that like translation to occur.
Yeah. Cool. That's very interesting.
Kind of following up on that question, like how exactly does one kind of convince a recruiter that like you are you're apt for this job when your background doesn't kind of reflect those kind of skills and things like that, right? Like how do you get past that barrier of convincing them when your CV doesn't reflect that you have the background and knowledge to be an expert on this?
My 2 cents over there is that you have to do some sort of homework before you speak with the recruiter. My understanding is that depending on what your definition of recruiter is, I'm assuming that it's not the hiring manager, it's the recruiter, the HR recruiter. Is that right? If that's true, I think what they're looking for is like a bunch of keywords in your CV for you to say, yes, I know about these keywords, because they really have just a checklist of things that you know. So as long as you can map your CV to what the recruiter is expecting, you should at least get your foot into the door.
Okay.
On the other end of things, they are also, trying to understand they want to work with you and that you would be happy working with them as well, right? So, think about why you want to work there and like what kind of skills that you have would be good. And I do think that in academia, we all have imposter syndrome and we don't really see our values as much. So what can I bring to the table for this particular role and specify? I told my new talking to the recruiter, you are convince guys about this job, like you can do it, and you need to convince them as well. Because when I first started interviewing, I had an issue like, oh, I will never get this job. Like, when I didn't convince myself to get this job, like they also not believe it. So kind of think about what they're looking for and how you would fit in. That conversation becomes easier.
Like it's sort of a game you play, because just like Anat was saying, like the recruiter could literally be a subcontractor that the company hires out. So they have no idea what you're gonna end up doing. And then there's recruiters that come from the company that you're applying for, and they have a more intimate knowledge of like the hiring process and the team that you're gonna end up working with. Play the game a little, like figure out if the recruiter is someone that you need to convince at the basic keyword level, or someone you need to convince at the one step closer to hiring than you think. Like that's also something that's been really interesting to hear from other people, is that recruiters are also really crappy at their jobs too. Like they are also just trying to grab CVs and present them to a team. They might not know. So you do have to play the field a little bit to get to understand they're also doing their job too. And part of the game is that making sure that you can convince them, just like SB was saying, that you deserve this job. All of my skills are transferable.
And as a scientist, like we are trained to have like a sense of integrity, right? But it can be often challenging when someone's asking you, do you know this? Like even though you've heard of that word before, you will say no because you've not maybe worked on it. And that's a tricky space to maneuver. But if it's a job that you're looking for, I would say yes. Say yes.
Well, I mean, I've also had a situation where you said yes, and then between interview 1 and interview 2, someone got the certificate saying that, yes, I proved myself. I know that skill. I interview 2. So it's a game you play.
It could help.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that the other side team.
I would like, again, this is a personal experience. I think that the whole process is very individualized. It's a lot of luck too, right? You know, like you're gonna end up, those are all disclaimers. But I always have been on the side of, okay, this is how much I know. And I also say that I can learn, you know, for instance, SQL, this is what I did in my PhD, and like, depending on what you want, I can learn this in a month, you know, stuff like that. So I was on the side of like, just keeping it, you know, a little bit more, stretching those truths, maybe, I don't know, but just if they ask me a specific question, I was able to answer it. You know, in the end, you're gonna work on it.
This is something that I've often heard from PhD students who are interested in applying to industry positions, that when they apply and they've been talking to people, the culture seems a little bit more like confident.
Yeah.
Than they feel like they're used to, like as a scientist, they feel like they have to dig down and do like 10 validations of something before they feel like they can say that they would want to start using it. But yeah, like maybe there's a little bit of that, like that sort of, I guess there's a little jargon, and then there's like a little bit of a different kind of confidence that it would be helpful to just talk with other people who are in some of these jobs and just get more of a sense of that, what that culture is like.
Thank you.
I have a question. So I am a student outside the US, and I'm going to start looking for postdoc positions soon. So I wanted to know what's the best way to look for postdoc positions is. Like, how do I find researchers who are looking for postdocs?
Oh yeah, this is a pretty good one. Have you gone to any conference notice boards recently? Those are very good. They are very, very good. Usually people who post them are actively looking literally in the moment, like a PI or somebody's like, I have a postdoc that's coming up or is already here in about 2 months. Job posting at a conference. It happens so quickly. Feeling this is pretty good.
Yeah, and also social media again, but if there's someone that, I would say if there's like a short list of people, maybe like 5 to 10 people whose work you really, really love, it doesn't hurt first checking their websites, and actually more of a networking thing, but over the course of like a year or so before you start looking, it doesn't hurt to reach out and just like chat with them, find them at a conference, chat with them, not necessarily about a postdoc, but just sort of about science. But in lieu of that, I think directly reaching out to some people who you really love, sometimes they might have a postdoc position upcoming, they might have somebody who's about to leave, they might just be really, really excited about working with you. They might not have any money, so there's that too. But it doesn't hurt to reach out to some people, especially like newer faculty, might be looking for postdocs, but you know, more senior faculty tend to have more connections, so there's a reverse thing. More senior faculty also might have more grants that they can pull money from. So yeah, I encourage you to reach out.
I'm gonna say, I got both of my postdoc positions by cold calling people who had no idea who I was. So it actually works. Not called them literally, email. Yes, yeah.
So that's what I wanted to ask. Like, is it okay to just send an email to someone I don't personally know yet?
Yes,
Yeah. That's a good thing to do, yeah.
A lot of postdocs in the lab are basically cold emails.
Yeah.
They got invited out to give a talk.
Okay,
And I apologize to people on Zoom, but I want to give our panelists a chance to get some pizza before it goes away. My recommendation is to move the conversation to the careers channel, and then our panelists can answer questions there as well. But we're gonna close the Zoom room here in a minute.
You guys
Well,
have-
thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
See ya.
Bye. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you, guys.